A horse trained for impossible missions finds the biggest challenge of its life in an isolated farm, protecting a legacy in danger and facing a storm of secrets and threats. The sun was setting behind the mountains of Appalachia when Richard Thompson passed through the rusted gates of Hope Ranch. The black Range Rover left a cloud of red dust in its wake as it followed the dirt road winding through old mango trees. Emily, his 23-year-old daughter, watched the landscape with a mix of fascination and apprehension. The property, long abandoned by the family, would now be their refuge. "Dad, are you sure this is necessary?" Emily asked, adjusting her sunglasses. "We could have hired more security in Denver, continued with our normal lives." Richard gripped the steering wheel tightly, his weathered hands showing the tension he carried. At 55, the successful businessman had never imagined he would need to hide on his own ranch. The threats had begun 3 weeks ago, when a group of bikers started circling his company and his home in the capital. "Emily, you don't understand. These aren't just ordinary threats. They know too much about us, about our routines. We need time to figure out what's going on." He parked the car in front of the ranch house, a well-preserved colonial building painted in shades of yellow and white. Nathan, the young 25-year-old foreman who managed the property, was already waiting on the porch. His tanned face broke into a welcoming smile, contrasting with the concern etched on the faces of the newcomers. "Welcome. Everything is prepared as you requested, Dr. Richard." The luggage was quickly carried into the house. Emily went up to her room, a spacious space with a view of the valley and the mountains surrounding the property. The young lawyer had left her promising law firm in Denver to accompany her father in this forced self-exile. As she arranged her clothes in the old wardrobe, her thoughts wandered to the events of the past few weeks. It all started with mysterious messages left at the company's reception. Then came the bikers, always in groups of 3 or 4, circling the street where the Thompsons lived. The final straw was when one of them managed to infiltrate a charity event organized by the company, leaving a clear warning: "We know who you really are, Richard Thompson." Night fell quickly over the ranch, bringing with it a cool breeze and the sound of crickets. Richard remained on the porch, watching the shadows dancing among the orchard trees. Nathan approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Dr. Richard," Michael called. "He said he'll arrive early tomorrow with a surprise that might help with the ranch's security." Richard nodded thoughtfully. Michael was an old family friend, a former police officer who now worked in security consulting. If there was anyone who could help them understand what was happening, it was him. The businessman sipped his coffee, the familiar bitterness comforting him. Hope Ranch had always been his favorite place in childhood, where he spent vacations with his grandparents. Now, decades later, he returned not as a carefree boy, but as a man seeking protection. Emily joined them on the porch, hugging herself against the cold night. "Nathan, have you noticed anything strange around here in the last few days?" The foreman hesitated for a moment before answering. "Actually, yes. 3 days ago, I found motorcycle tire tracks near the abandoned shed. I thought it was odd since no one from the area usually comes around here." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. Had they already been found? The ranch was over 200 kilometers from Denver, and very few people knew of its existence. "Starting tomorrow, we'll tighten security," Richard declared, his firm voice masking the fear that was beginning to grow. "Michael will bring resources to help us protect the property." The silence of the night was momentarily broken by the distant sound of engines. Emily grabbed her father's arm, her eyes wide with worry. Nathan quickly turned off the porch lights, plunging them into the protective darkness of the Appalachian night. The noise grew louder, closer, until they could see headlights passing along the main road about 1 kilometer from the ranch. There were 3 or 4 motorcycles, their lights cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes in the night. "They've found us," Emily whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Richard hugged his daughter, trying to convey a sense of security he didn't feel. "Stay calm. It might just be a coincidence. Michael will be here tomorrow and we can plan our protection better." The motorcycles passed without stopping, their roars gradually fading until they were swallowed by the night. But the tranquility of the ranch had been shattered. In the sky, the full moon bathed the property in its silvery light, casting restless shadows among the ancient trees. Hope Ranch, which was supposed to be their refuge, now felt more like a trap with no escape. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from and we'll continue. The sunrise in Appalachia painted the sky with shades of pink and orange as an old Range Rover pickup truck made its way up the road to Hope Ranch. Michael, a man in his 60s with graying hair and a military posture, drove carefully, occasionally, glancing at the trailer he was towing. Inside it, a very special passenger awaited to meet their new home. Richard was already waiting on the porch, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands, when the vehicle parked in the main courtyard. Emily, still drowsy, joined her father, curious to discover the surprise promised by Michael. "My old friend." Michael stepped out of the car with a wide smile, embracing Richard tightly. "I've brought something that will completely change the security of this ranch." Nathan approached the trailer, his eyes shining with admiration as Michael began to open it. Inside, a majestic black horse observed everyone with an almost supernatural intelligence in its eyes. The animal had an athletic build, a glossy coat, and a posture that demonstrated years of specialized training. "This is Sentinel," Michael announced proudly. "He was one of the best horses in the police tactical unit. He's retired from official service, but his skills remain extraordinary." The horse stepped out of the trailer with elegance, its hooves touching the ranch ground with studied delicacy. Emily approached slowly, fascinated by the imposing presence of the animal. "Hare's trained to detect suspicious movements, make specific patrols, and, most impressively, has a unique alert system," Michael explained, stroking the horse's muscular neck. "Sentinel can identify threats long before any electronic security system." Richard observed the animal with a mix of skepticism and hope. "Michael, I appreciate the concern, but how can a retired horse help us?" "Ah, my friend," Michael smiled, his eyes gleaming with knowledge accumulated over years of experience. "Sentinel is not just a retired horse. He participated in the most complex police operations. His training included territory reconnaissance, threat identification, and perimeter protection. Plus, he has a special instinct for detecting danger." As if to demonstrate Michael's words, Sentinel suddenly raised his head, his ears moving toward the abandoned barn. His muscles visibly tensed under the black coat, and a low whinny escaped his throat. "See," Michael pointed out, "he's already doing his job." Something in the barn caught his attention. Nathan, who knew every inch of the property, frowned. "That barn has been empty for years. We only store some old tools there." "Then maybe it's time to take a closer look," Michael suggested, already walking in the direction indicated by Sentinel. The horse followed by his side, without the need for reins or verbal commands. The group approached the barn cautiously. It was an old structure, with faded wooden walls and a zinc roof that had seen better days. Sentinel remained alert, his ears constantly moving, catching every sound. Emily, who had inherited her mother's investigative curiosity, a renowned lawyer, noticed something peculiar on the ground. "Dad, look at this. Fresh tire marks, and they're not from our car." Michael crouched down to examine the marks. His years of police experience spoke louder. "They're from motorcycles, and by the pattern, I'd say they're big bikes, probably. The same ones you saw last night." Sentinel moved into the shed, his hooves rhythmically tapping on the dirt floor. The group followed, turning on their phone flashlights to illuminate the dark space. At first glance, the interior of the shed seemed normal. Old tools were scattered around, covered in a thin layer of dust. But Sentinel remained restless, focusing, his attention on a specific corner of the place. Nathan approached the area indicated by the horse and found something that made his heart race. Among old boxes and rusted tools, there was a partially burned piece of paper. Upon closer inspection, everyone could see that it was a detailed map of the region, with Hope Ranch clearly marked. "This isn't a coincidence," declared Michael, his deep voice echoing in the silent shed. "Someone has been studying the property, planning something. And thanks to Sentinel, we now know they're closer than we thought." Emily hugged herself, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the mild morning temperature. "What do we do now?" "Now," Michael replied, placing a hand on Richard's shoulder, "we start preparing our defenses. And with Sentinel by our side, we'll have an advantage they won't expect." The black horse let out a soft whinny, as if agreeing with Michael's words. His intelligent eyes scanned the shed, memorizing every detail, every shadow. Hope Ranch now had a new protector, a silent guardian who carried years of training and a sharp instinct for danger. Richard watched the animal with newfound respect. Perhaps Michael was right. Perhaps that extraordinary horse was exactly what they needed to face the threats surrounding them. As the afternoon fell over Hope Ranch, Emily decided to explore the property further, accompanied by Sentinel. The horse had shown a special affection for the young lawyer, following her with a loyalty that even impressed Michael. As they walked along the trail bordering the main pasture, Emily noticed how the animal seemed to map every inch of the territory with his keen senses. "You really are special, aren't you?" she whispered, stroking the black mane of the horse. Sentinel responded with a soft whinny, his ears moving in all directions, picking up the sounds of the ranch. Suddenly the horse froze, his nostrils flared and his muscles tensed. Emily, already familiar with the animal's warning signs, stopped, as well, looking in the direction he was staring. It was a more remote area of the property, near the border with the neighboring ranch. "What is it, boy? Did you see something?" In response, Sentinel began moving in that direction, maintaining a cautious pace. Emily followed him, her heart beating slightly faster. After a few minutes of walking, they reached a clearing partially, hidden by a group of old trees. What they found there made Emily swallow hard. Hidden among the vegetation was an improvised observation post, cigarette butts scattered on the ground, fresh boot prints, and, more concerning, a pair of binoculars, hastily abandoned. Someone had been watching the ranch from there. Emily grabbed her phone, but there was no signal in that part of the property. Sentinel remained on alert, his eyes fixed on the trail leading back to the main house. With a gentle touch on the animal's neck, Emily understood the message. It was time to head back. On the porch of the main house, Richard was talking to Michael about the security measures they needed to implement. Nathan had left for town to buy some necessary equipment. "We need to install motion sensors in strategic points," Michael explained, sketching an improvised map of the property. "But our greatest asset will be using Sentinel's skills intelligently." "How so?" asked Richard, still not entirely convinced about the animal's capabilities. Sentinel was trained to recognize patterns of suspicious behavior. He can identify when someone is hiding or approaching stealthily. Plus, his senses are much sharper than ours. He can hear a motorcycle approaching long before we can see its lights. The conversation was interrupted by the hurried arrival of Emily and Sentinel. The young woman, still breathless, reported her discovery. Michael immediately grabbed his gun and, accompanied by Richard, followed Emily to the location. The observation post revealed more than they expected. In addition to the signs already noticed by Emily, Michael found an old phone partially buried in the soft soil. The device was damaged, but the memory card remained intact. "This might give us some answers," murmured Michael, carefully storing the card. "We need to analyze its contents with caution." Sentinel remained on constant watch, his ears alert to any suspicious sound. The sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky with orange hues that, instead of bringing the usual peace of dusk, seemed to foreshadow a night of tension. Back at the house, Michael connected the memory card to his laptop. The images they found were disturbing. Photos of the ranch taken from various angles, including records of movement in and out over the past few days. There was also a text file with detailed notes about the property's routine. "They've been watching us longer than we thought," Richard noted, his voice betraying concern. "But why? What do they really want?" Emily, who was analyzing the photos with her trained lawyer's eye, noticed something peculiar. "Dad, look at this. All the photos have a special focus on the abandoned shed. It's like they're looking for something specific there." Michael scratched, his chin thoughtful. "The shed. Richard, how long has your family owned this ranch?" "Since my grandfather. He bought the property in the 50s, but we never spent much time here. It was more of a refuge for tough times." "And the shed, has it always been there?" "Yes, but—" Richard paused, an old memory surfacing in his mind. "Now that you mention it, I remember my grandfather always said the shed held important secrets. We thought it was just a story to entertain the kids. A sharp whinny from Sentinel cut through the night, making everyone jump. The horse, which had been grazing near the house, was now in full alert mode, his body turned toward the main road. Michael quickly turned off the lights. In the silence that followed, they could hear the unmistakable sound of engines approaching. It wasn't just motorcycles this time, there was also the heavier noise of a larger vehicle. "They're coming," whispered Michael, his voice tense. "And this time it doesn't seem like they're just here to observe." Sentinel let out another whinny, softer this time, as if understanding the need for discretion. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, fixed on the direction of the approaching sounds. The night at Hope Ranch promised to be long, and the secrets, held for decades, seemed on the verge of coming to light. The noise of engines grew gradually in the dark night of Appalachia. Inside the main house of Hope Ranch, Michael quickly organized a plan of action. With precise gestures, he positioned Richard and Emily at the back of the house, while he himself headed to the porch, staying in the shadows. Sentinel, demonstrating his specialized training, had strategically moved to a position that allowed him to observe both the main road and the abandoned shed. The horse maintained an alert but silent posture, his ears constantly twitching to catch every nuance of the approaching sounds. "Nathan hasn't returned from town yet," whispered Emily, concerned for the young foreman. "He knows the area better than anyone," replied Richard, trying to stay calm. "If he notices anything suspicious, he'll know how to protect himself." Headlights began to emerge through the trees, partially illuminating the property. There were 3 motorcycles and a dark pickup truck, all with their lights dimmed, clearly trying not to draw attention. The vehicles stopped a considerable distance from the house, their occupants remaining momentarily in the shadows. Michael, with years of police experience, observed every movement through night vision binoculars. 6 men, he murmured into the communicator he had distributed earlier. "All armed. They're splitting into groups." Sentinel let out a low whinny and began tapping his hoof on the ground in a specific pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 taps. Michael immediately recognized the code he had helped develop during his time in the police force. More people were approaching from another side of the property. Suddenly, Emily's phone vibrated. A message from Nathan. "I'm okay. I noticed suspicious movement on the road and hid at Mr. John's ranch. Police are on their way." A momentary wave of relief passed through the group, but it was quickly interrupted by the sound of breaking glass at the back of the house. Sentinel immediately moved in that direction, his hooves silent on the damp grass of the garden. "They're trying to distract us," Michael whispered into the communicator. "The real target must be the shed." As if confirming his words, 2 shadows emerged from the darkness, moving stealthily toward the old wooden structure. Sentinel, noticing the movement, let out a new pattern of whinnies, a code Michael recognized as multiple targets on the move. Emily, watching everything from her position, noticed something strange about one of the intruders. "Dad," she whispered, "that man. The way he moves, I recognize him from the company charity event." Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. The confirmation that there was a traitor among his own employees made everything even more complex. But why so much interest in the abandoned shed? At that moment, Sentinel began to behave differently. Instead of maintaining his strategic position, the horse started moving toward a specific spot near the shed. His behavior was so deliberate that Michael immediately understood. The animal had detected something important. "Follow the horse," Michael ordered through the communicator. "He doesn't act like this without a good reason." Sentinel stopped near an old tree, his hooves insistently tapping at a specific spot on the ground. Michael, using the flashlight, with extreme care, noticed something metallic gleaming among the exposed roots, a small trapdoor, almost completely covered by dirt and vegetation. "Impossible," murmured Richard, recognizing the mechanism. "My grandfather always spoke of a safe place, a hideout he had built during hard times. We thought they were just stories." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the discovery. The intruders, noticing the movement near the shed, began converging on that area. Sentinel immediately assumed a defensive position, his body serving as a barrier between the group and the approaching figures. "Police!" A strong voice cut through the darkness, accompanied by the sound of sirens in the distance. Nathan had managed to bring reinforcements in time. The chaos that followed was intense. The intruders, caught between the arriving police and the group at the shed, began to scatter. Two of them, however, remained determined to reach the newly discovered trapdoor. Sentinel, demonstrating his special abilities, managed to block the advance of one of the men, while Michael confronted the other. In the blue and red lights of the approaching patrol cars, Emily finally got a clear look at the face of one of the intruders. It was Robert, the head of security she had hired for the company's last event. "Why?" she asked, her voice filled with disappointment and anger. Robert, seeing himself surrounded, lowered his weapon. "Your grandfather," he said, looking at Richard. "He hid something here years ago, something worth far more than you realize." The sirens were now very close, and the last resisting intruders finally surrendered. Sentinel maintained his protective stance, his eyes attentive to every movement. The mystery of the abandoned shed was about to be revealed, but one thing was already clear. Hope Ranch held secrets far deeper than anyone could imagine. Morning arrived at Hope Ranch, bringing a tense calm after the events of the previous night. The sun had barely risen when Richard, Emily, Michael, and Nathan gathered around the trapdoor discovered by Sentinel. The horse remained nearby, as vigilant as ever, while the first rays of sunlight illuminated the scene. "We need to open it carefully," warned Michael, examining the old mechanism. "Structures like this can be unstable after so much time." Richard ran his hand through his graying hair, memories of his childhood flashing back. "My grandfather, Anthony Thompson, used to say that the ranch held a treasure, but he always spoke so mysteriously that no one took him seriously." Nathan, who had brought the proper tools, began working on the trapdoor with care. The structure, though old, had been well built and preserved. After a few minutes of meticulous work, the mechanism gave way with a metallic creak. Sentinel, who had been watching everything closely, approached as the door was opened, his snout sniffing the air that escaped from the opening. Michael smiled, admiring the animal's instinct. "He's checking if it's safe for us to go down." A metal ladder descended about 3 meters into a small underground room. Emily, using her phone's flashlight, was the first to notice the walls lined with metal, panels protecting the space from the soil's moisture. "Incredible," she murmured, carefully descending. "This must have taken an immense effort to build, especially back then." The space was surprisingly well organized, with metal shelves along the walls and an old safe in one corner. On a metal table, there was a yellowed envelope addressed to my grandson, Richard. With trembling hands, Richard opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, his grandfather's elegant handwriting still perfectly legible. "Dear Richard, if you are reading this letter, it means you have found the place I built to protect not only material goods, but the true history of our family. In 1964, when times were dark, many families were in danger because of their political positions and ideals. I was a banker and used my position to help persecuted people protect their assets and important documents. This safe holds not only documents that could change the history of several families, but also evidence of transactions and transfers that needed to remain hidden to protect lives. Along with the documents, there is a considerable amount of assets entrusted to me, jewelry, gold, and other valuables that belong to these families. I have kept this secret all these years, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. Some of these assets have heirs who never knew their whereabouts. Others belong to families that have completely disappeared. The safe's combination is your birth date, my grandson. I trust your judgment to do what is right with this legacy. With love, your grandfather, Anthony Thompson." Emily hugged her father, who had tears in his eyes. "Now I understand why Grandpa always said the ranch was more than just a refuge." Michael, who was examining the safe with professional attention, turned to Richard. "This explains a lot. Someone must have discovered this place, perhaps through old documents or bank records." "Robert," Emily recalled. "He worked at the bank before joining our security company. He must have found some clue in the files." At the top of the stairs, Sentinel let out a soft whinny. Nathan, who had gone up to check the perimeter, returned with news. "The police have finished their investigation in the area where the intruders, where they found documents in the abandoned car, including old blueprints of the ranch. Richard approached the safe, his fingers hovering over the numeric keypad. There's a lot at stake here. It's not just material value, but the history of several families. And now, Dad, Emily asked, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. What will we do with all of this? First, Richard replied, beginning to type his birth date into the safe. We need to understand exactly what we have here. Then we'll try to locate the heirs of these families. It's the least we can do to honor Grandpa's legacy. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing its interior neatly organized into various drawers and compartments, carefully preserved. Documents, folders labeled with family names, and small boxes that surely contained the valuables mentioned in the letter. Sentinel, up above, maintained his constant vigil, as if understanding the historical significance of the moment. The sun was already high in the sky, casting a different light over Hope Ranch. What once seemed like just a refuge from the current danger now revealed itself as a guardian of memories and stories that needed to be preserved and finally told. This is going to take time, Michael remarked, observing the volume of documents, and we need to be very careful with every piece of information we find here. Emily had already begun organizing the documents methodically, her experience as a lawyer guiding her actions. We'll need to create a system to catalog all of this. Every document could be the missing piece in some family's puzzle. The sound of hooves on the ground above caught everyone's attention. Sentinel had detected something. Nathan quickly went up to check, returning with a relieved smile. It's just the mailman, delivering more security equipment we ordered. Richard glanced once more at his grandfather's letter, then at the documents and valuables stored for so many years. Hope Ranch had become much more than a simple refuge. It was now the starting point for a journey of discovery and redemption. The makeshift office in the main room of Hope Ranch was filled with carefully organized documents spread across a large wooden table. Emily, surrounded by stacks of papers, worked methodically on cataloging each item found in the underground vault. Her laptop displayed a detailed spreadsheet where she recorded every discovery. It's impressive, she commented, looking up from a particular set of documents. Grandpa kept meticulous records of everything. Every stored item has a complete history, with dates, names, and even family trees of the families involved. Richard, who was examining old photographs found among the documents, nodded thoughtfully. My grandfather was always extremely organized. Now I understand why he insisted so much that I study genealogy and history when I was young. Sentinel, resting near the window, suddenly lifted his head, his ears perking up in alert. Seconds later, they heard the sound of a car approaching. Michael, always vigilant, checked through the window. It's Dr. Helen Santos, he announced, visibly relaxing. The historian we contacted yesterday. Helen's arrival brought a new perspective to the investigative work. An expert in the history of the American military period, she examined the documents with experienced eyes, her expression alternating between surprise and admiration. This is extraordinary, she declared, adjusting her glasses as she examined a specific set of documents. These bank transfers, combined with these property records, they tell a complete story of how some families managed to preserve their wealth during the toughest years. Nathan entered the room carrying a tray with coffee, brewed from beans, harvested on the ranch itself. The rich aroma filled the space, providing a moment of pause in the intense research activity. I found something interesting, said Emily, holding up a yellowed envelope. A list of code names. It seems Grandpa created an elaborate system to protect the identities of the people involved. Helen approached, her professional interest piqued. That was common at the time. Many families used pseudonyms and codes to communicate and conduct transactions. The question is, how do we decode this now? As if responding to the question, Sentinel stood up and walked over to an old bookshelf, where he began gently tapping his hoof against the wooden base. Michael, who had learned to trust the animal's instincts, approached to investigate. There's something here, he announced, carefully removing the baseboard of the shelf. A hidden compartment revealed another set of documents, including a small notebook. Grandpa's diary, exclaimed Richard, recognizing the familiar handwriting. He always carried a similar notebook when I was a child. The pages of the diary proved to be a crucial key. Anthony Thompson had recorded not only the codes used, but also personal stories about each family he had helped. It was a touching testament to courage and compassion in difficult times. "Look at this," said Helen, her voice choked with emotion. He stayed in touch with some of these families for years, even after the political situation improved. There are letters here dated as late as 1985. Emily, using her skills as a lawyer, began cross-referencing the diary's information with the already catalogued documents. With this, we can start tracing the current whereabouts of these families. Many likely have living heirs who have no idea this inheritance exists. Sentinel, who had returned to his post by the window, maintained his constant vigilance. The horse seemed to understand the historical significance of the moment, his behavior reflecting the gravity of the situation. "We're going to need specialized help for this," commented Michael, thinking about the legal and security implications. Some of these families may have scattered across the world. Others might have changed their names. "And we need to be extremely careful," added Richard. "Robert and his group may not have been the only ones to discover this. If this information leaks the wrong way, we could jeopardize all the protective work my grandfather did." Helen, who had set aside a specific set of documents, called everyone's attention. "I found something that might help us. Your grandfather kept in touch with a network of trusted people in different countries. Lawyers, historians, diplomats. Some of these contacts might still be active." "That explains his frequent travels," murmured Richard, recalling his grandfather's long absences during his childhood. He wasn't just tending to the bank's business, he was keeping this protection network running. The afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows through the farmhouse windows. Emily watched Sentinel, who remained alert even after a full day of work. The horse perfectly embodied the spirit of dedication and protection that Anthony Thompson had demonstrated throughout his life. "We have an enormous responsibility in our hands," she said, organizing the day's documents into secure folders. "It's not just about returning material possessions. It's about restoring family histories, reconnecting people with their past, and honoring the legacy of a man who risked everything to help others," added Helen, carefully closing Anthony's diary. Hope Ranch, which had started as a temporary refuge, was now transforming into the center of a much larger mission. Within its ancient walls and newly discovered secrets, a new story was beginning to unfold, weaving together the past and present into a tapestry of redemption and discovery. The dawn at Hope Ranch found Emily hunched over her laptop, her eyes tired but attentive to the information appearing on the screen. After a night of intense research, she had managed to locate the first descendants of some of the families mentioned in her grandfather's documents. "Dad, you need to see this," she called, her voice filled with surprise. Richard, who was having his breakfast on the porch under the constant watch of Sentinel, quickly approached. "The Mendez family," Emily began, turning the laptop so her father could see. "Remember that set of jewelry catalogued as Estate M 1964? I found the granddaughter of the original owner. She's a university professor in Portugal and has been researching her family's history for years." Sentinel, grazing near the porch, suddenly raised his head, his ears turned toward the main road. Seconds later, they heard the familiar sound of Michael's pickup truck approaching. The former police officer wasn't alone. In the passenger seat, a woman in her 70s looked at the ranch with tearful eyes. Richard felt his heart race as he recognized her. It was Claire Mendonça, his grandfather's former secretary at the U Bank. "Mrs. Claire," he exclaimed, helping her out of the vehicle. "It's been so long." "Richard, my boy," she smiled, though her expression carried a peculiar seriousness. "When Michael told me about the discovery of the safe, I knew I had to come immediately. There's much you need to know." Claire observed Sentinel with interest, and the horse, surprisingly, approached her with an unusual familiarity. "Interesting," she murmured. "Your grandfather also had a horse like this, specially trained to protect the ranch. His name was Sentinel." Inside the house, Claire examined the documents spread across the table with evident knowledge. "I helped your grandfather organize much of this material," she revealed. "Every code, every classification system, everything was designed to protect not just the possessions, but especially the people." "Did you know about all of this?" asked Emily, fascinated. "Not everything, dear." Anthony was very careful. He compartmentalized the information. I knew about the code system, but I didn't know the details of each family. It was safer that... Way. Claire picked up one of the documents, her fingers gently tracing the old notes. But there's something you all need to know, something even your grandfather didn't fully uncover. At that moment, Nathan hurriedly entered the room. Sorry to interrupt, but something strange happened. I found this stuck to the main gate. He held out a plain, unmarked brown envelope. Michael examined the envelope carefully before opening it. Inside, there was only an old black and white photo showing Anthony Thompson alongside a group of men in front of a bank. On the back, a single sentence: "Not all secrets should come to light." Claire paled as she saw the photograph. This photo, it was taken in 1963, a day before the bank was sold. Some of these men, they didn't want Anthony to help certain families. Sentinel, who had been watching everything through the open window, began tapping his hoof on the ground in his alert pattern. Michael immediately checked the perimeter of the house but found nothing suspicious. "We need to be even more careful," Claire warned. "What you found here isn't just historical records. They're proof that not everyone acted rightly back then." Emily began connecting the dots. That's why Robert was so interested. He must have discovered something in the bank archives that hinted at the existence of these documents. "Not just that," Claire continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Some of the men in this photo still have family members in positions of power. They wouldn't want certain stories to come to light." Richard studied the photo with renewed focus. "I recognize some faces. They belong to traditional families from Denver." "Exactly," confirmed Claire. "Your grandfather didn't just safeguard the belongings of persecuted families, but also evidence of those who collaborated with the persecutions." The sound of hooves firmly hitting the ground caught everyone's attention. Sentinel was especially restless, his movements indicating that something or someone was approaching the ranch. Nathan ran to check. "It's an unfamiliar car," he reported. "It stopped at the start of the road as if it's watching." "They already know," murmured Claire, her voice heavy with concern. "The discovery of the vault didn't go unnoticed. We need to act quickly." Emily was already on her laptop, typing furiously. "I'll speed up the process of contacting the families we've already identified. The more people who know about the existence of these documents, the safer it will be. And we need to find a safer place to store all of this," added Michael. "The ranch is too isolated. We could easily be surrounded." Sentinel maintained his alert stance, his eyes fixed in the direction of the unfamiliar car. The animal seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, as if he knew his mission of protection had become even more crucial. Claire watched the horse with a sad smile. "You know, Richard, your grandfather always said that the truth has its own time to come to light. It seems that time has finally arrived." The morning sun was now high in the sky, fully illuminating Hope Ranch. What had started as a search for security had turned into something much larger, a race to reveal long-buried truths before those who preferred to keep them hidden could intervene. The afternoon progressed at Hope Ranch, and the group had turned the main room into an improvised operations center. Helen, the historian, had returned after making important contacts in Denver, bringing with her a notebook full of crucial information. "The families I managed to contact are in shock," she reported, organizing her notes. "Many thought their ancestors' belongings had been lost forever. One of them even tried to sue the bank in the 80s, without success." Emily, who was coordinating the digital cataloging of all the documents, looked up from her work. "I found something interesting about that. There are records that someone within the bank systematically blocked any investigation into these assets." Claire, who had stayed at the ranch at Michael's request, approached with a cup of tea in her hands. "That doesn't surprise me. After Anthony retired, a lot changed at the bank. People who didn't share his values took on important positions." Sentinel, who was grazing near the house, always on alert, suddenly raised his head. His behavior caught Nathan's attention, who immediately checked the newly installed security cameras. "2 more unknown cars on the main road," he reported. "They seem to be monitoring all the entrances to the ranch." Michael, who was patrolling the perimeter of the property, returned with troubling news. "I found this stuck on one of the fences." He held out a folded piece of paper containing a typed message. Last chance to keep the past where it belongs. They're nervous, observed Helen, adjusting her glasses. The more documents we analyze, the more connections we find between certain powerful families and questionable actions from the past. Richard, who was examining old photographs found in the safe, made a disturbing discovery. Look at this, he called out, holding up a specific photo. This man next to my grandfather, he's the father of Robert, our former head of security. Emily stepped closer to get a better look, and he's wearing a bank badge. Augustus Mendez, confirmed Claire, her voice tinged with disdain. He was the bank's special operations manager. He was one of the most vocal opponents of your grandfather's secret actions, Richard. Sentinel began to stomp his hooves on the ground in his most urgent, alert pattern. Seconds later, Nathan's phone rang. It was one of the ranch's neighbors. There's a group of men asking about the property at John's bar, he reported after hanging up. They're trying to figure out all the entrances and exits to the ranch. They're planning something, concluded Michael, years of police experience, evident in his voice. We need to act before it's too late. Helen, who had moved closer to one of the windows, watched Sentinel with interest. The horse is acting differently. It's not just alert, it's like he's trying to show us something. The animal had positioned itself in a specific way, its attention focused in a particular direction. Michael, who knew the horse's behavior well, followed its gaze. The old barn, he murmured, the one we haven't used in years. Nathan, who knew every inch of the property, furrowed his brow. There's something strange. Last night I thought I saw lights coming from that direction, but when I checked, I found nothing. We need to check it out, Richard decided. But carefully. If there's something there, we can't alert whoever is watching us. Emily was already on her laptop, accessing the old blueprints of the ranch. There's an underground passage that connects the house to the barn. It was used to store supplies during the rainy season. Your grandfather told me about that passage once, Claire recalled. He said he had adapted it for emergencies, but he never mentioned exactly how. Sentinel held his position, as if confirming that this was the way to go. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with orange hues that seemed like an omen. I'll check it out, Michael offered. Nathan, come with me. Richard, you and Emily keep cataloging the documents. If we need to leave in a hurry, we have to have everything organized. Helen approached Sentinel, stroking his neck. It's amazing how he seems to understand everything that's happening. More than that, Claire commented, watching the animal, he seems to know things we haven't discovered yet. Twilight fell over Hope Ranch, turning shadows into potential threats and silences into harbingers of danger. On the horizon, dark clouds began to form, promising a stormy night. The race against time continued. While some tried to keep the past buried, others fought to bring the truth to light. And in the midst of this battle, an extraordinary horse seemed to be the key to unraveling even deeper mysteries. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching us from, and we'll continue. Night had fallen over Hope Ranch when Michael and Nathan began their exploration of the underground passage. Equipped with flashlights and communicators, they carefully removed the library rug that concealed the trapdoor. Keep in constant contact, Helen instructed, adjusting the radio frequency. If anything seems suspicious, come back immediately. Sentinel watched everything from the library window, his posture indicating growing unease. The horse seemed torn between following the explorers and maintaining its vigil on the surface. The passage turned out to be surprisingly well preserved. Walls reinforced with ancient bricks and a dirt floor formed a tunnel that stretched toward the barn. Marks on the ground and walls suggested recent use. Someone has been here, whispered Nathan, pointing to partially erased footprints in the dirt, and not too long ago. Meanwhile, in the library, Emily continued her work of digitizing the most critical documents. Claire assisted, identifying names and connections that only someone with her historical knowledge could recognize. It's fascinating, commented Helen, examining a series of photographs. Each image tells a different story, but they all connect in some way. Richard, who was monitoring external movements through the security cameras, noticed something peculiar. The cars that were on the road, they're gone. In the tunnel, Michael and Nathan advanced cautiously. The air grew denser as they approached the barn. The sound of their breathing echoed softly off the ancient walls. "Michael, look at this," called Nathan, illuminating a series of markings on the wall. They were numbers and letters, seemingly a code similar to the one used in the vault documents. "CM 1964R, Michael read in a low voice. "Camargo, 1964. But what does the R mean?" The radio crackled with Claire's voice. "R was the code for resistance. Your grandfather used that marking to identify safe locations, Richard." Suddenly, a noise above them made the two men stop. It was footsteps coming from the barn. Michael signaled for Nathan to stay silent as they moved forward more slowly. In the house, Sentinel began to show increasing agitation. The horse alternated its gaze between the tunnel entrance and the library windows, as if sensing dangers in both directions. "Something's wrong," murmured Emily, observing the animal's behavior. "He never acts like this without a reason." Helen approached one of the windows, trying to spot any suspicious movement in the darkness. The moon, partially obscured by clouds, cast unsettling shadows over the property. In the tunnel, Michael and Nathan reached a staircase leading into the barn. The sound of footsteps had ceased, but a faint light filtered through the cracks of the hatch above. "Base, do you copy?" whispered Michael over the radio. "Loud and clear," replied Richard. "What's the situation?" "There's someone in the barn, and from the light, they have professional equipment." At that moment, Sentinel began to stomp his hooves on the ground in a specific pattern, more urgent than his usual alert. Claire immediately recognized the meaning. "We need to get you out of there now." Her voice conveyed urgency over the radio. "That's the signal Anthony used to indicate a trap." No sooner had the words been spoken than a metallic sound echoed. Through the tunnel, someone was opening the barn hatch. Michael and Nathan quickly retreated, their flashlights off, moving only by memory of the path they had taken. In the library, Sentinel suddenly positioned himself in front of the tunnel entrance. His ears turned toward the sound of rapidly approaching footsteps. "They're coming back," announced Helen, who was maintaining radio contact. "But there's someone else coming down from the barn side." Emily quickly began storing the most important documents in a secure folder. Claire, meanwhile, headed to a specific corner of the library. "Anthony showed me this once," she said, pressing a specific spot on the bookshelf. A soft click revealed a hidden compartment. He always had a plan B. The sound of footsteps in the tunnel grew closer. Sentinel held his position, tense but controlled, as if waiting for the exact moment to act. Michael and Nathan emerged from the hatch, breathless. "There are at least 3 men following us," Michael reported quickly, closing the passage behind them. "The hidden compartment leads to another tunnel," explained Claire, already removing books to reveal the passage. "It connects the library to the old lookout post on the hill." Suddenly, Sentinel let out a low whinny, his signal for imminent danger. The sound of footsteps in the main tunnel was getting closer. "We don't have much time," urged Richard, helping to transfer the important documents into backpacks. "We need to move only the essentials." Helen, who continued monitoring the external cameras, noticed suspicious movements. "There are people approaching from the main road as well. They're trying to surround us." The storm that had been threatening all day finally began, with distant thunder announcing its arrival. Sentinel stood firm in his protective position, his eyes fixed on the entrance to the main tunnel. Hope Ranch, which had guarded so many secrets over the decades, prepared for yet another night of revelations and dangers. The rain that began to fall seemed like a prelude to the events about to unfold. The rain pounded Hope Ranch with increasing intensity, turning the ground into a treacherous mud pit. Inside the library, the group moved with controlled urgency, transferring essential documents to the newly revealed secret compartment by Claire. "This tunnel was built after the first one," she explained, while helping to organize the evacuation. "Anthony planned it specifically for situations like this." Sentinel maintained his strategic position, his ears attuned to the sounds coming from the main tunnel. The horse occasionally glanced at the new passage, as if assessing escape routes. "Helen, how many can you see out there?" asked Michael, checking his equipment. "At least 8 people approaching from the main road," she replied, her eyes fixed on the security camera feeds, "and 2 more vehicles just parked near the back gate." Emily finished storing the last critical documents in her waterproof backpack. Among them was a particular envelope that Claire had identified as especially important. It contained evidence directly linking some powerful families to questionable actions in the past. The lookout post on the hill offers a privileged view of the entire area, explained Nathan, who knew the property well. If we can get there, we'll have a strategic advantage. A particularly loud thunderclap made the library windows shake. At the same moment, Sentinel let out a low whinny, his most urgent alert. The sound of footsteps in the main tunnel was very close. "We're out of time," declared Michael. "We need to split up. Nathan and I will create a distraction while you all head through the new tunnel." "No," intervened Claire, her voice carrying surprising authority. "There's something you need to know about the lookout post, something only Anthony and I knew." At that moment, a loud knock came from the trapdoor of the main tunnel. Sentinel immediately positioned himself between the group and the entrance, his muscles tense and ready for action. "The outpost isn't just an observation point," Claire continued quickly. "It's a full communication station. Anthony kept equipment there, connected to a network of trusted contacts. He called it the last resort." Emily, who was already partially inside the new tunnel, stopped in surprise. "That's why Grandpa spent so much time up there." "Exactly," Claire confirmed. "And there's more. The outpost has a direct link to people who can protect this information. Journalists, historians, international archivists. People Anthony trusted to tell the true story when the time came." The trapdoor of the main tunnel shuddered with another loud bang. The rain was now a curtain of water pounding the ranch's roof, frequent thunderclaps making the night even more dramatic. "Go," ordered Michael, positioning himself strategically. "Nathan and I will buy you time." Sentinel, surprisingly, moved toward the new tunnel, as if understanding the plan. The horse seemed to indicate it would follow the main group, protecting the precious cargo of documents. "Miss Claire," called Helen, who was already in the tunnel, "how extensive is this network of contacts?" "Larger than anyone imagines," Claire replied as she helped Richard seal the passage entrance behind them. "Anthony built something extraordinary over the years. It wasn't just about protecting material possessions. It was about preserving the truth for future generations." The new tunnel was narrower than the first, but better structured. Old yet functional emergency lights illuminated the path with a soft glow. "My grandfather thought of everything," murmured Richard, noticing the construction details. The sound of a muffled explosion came from the direction of the library. Michael had begun his diversion. Sentinel, following closely behind the group, remained surprisingly calm, as if trusting the plan. "The outpost has its own power source," Claire explained as they moved forward. "Hidden solar panels and a battery system that Anthony maintained regularly. He knew that one day this information would need to come to light." Outside, the storm continued in full force, nature seeming to conspire to protect their escape. The thunder masked any sounds they might make, while the torrential rain hindered their pursuers' movements. Emily, who was leading the group through, the tunnel suddenly stopped. "There's something ahead," she whispered. "It looks like light." Claire smiled, even in the tension of the moment. "The outpost's automatic system. It recognizes movement after so many years of inactivity. Anthony always said the truth has its own time to come to light. It seems that time has finally arrived." The group moved through the secret passage, carrying not only historical documents, but also the responsibility of revealing long-buried truths. The storm-battering Hope Ranch seemed to symbolize the turbulence of the moment, a time of transformation where secrets from the past would finally find their way into the light. The watchtower revealed itself to be much more than a simple observation point. When the group emerged from the tunnel, through a carefully camouflaged metal door, they found an environment that seemed to have been transported from the past into the present. "Incredible," whispered Helen, her eyes scanning the walls filled with communication equipment. "It's like a living museum of resistance." Claire moved through the space with familiarity, activating systems and checking equipment. Old monitors flickered to life, revealing data and communication screens that seemed to have been kept on standby for years. "Anthony kept all of this running through periodic updates," she explained, her fingers dancing over a vintage keyboard. The main system is connected to an international network of secure archives. Sentinel positioned himself near the tunnel entrance, his ears alert to any suspicious sounds. The storm continued outside, occasional lightning illuminating the interior of the outpost through strategically placed small windows. Emily approached a particular shelf, where dozens of magnetic tapes and external hard drives were organized chronologically. These are backups, she realized. Grandpa kept copies of everything. More than that, replied Claire, opening a hidden compartment under one of the tables. Here are the keys to decode all the documents we brought. Anthony developed his own encryption system. Richard examined a detailed map of the region that occupied one of the walls. Red dots marked specific locations, connected by lines that formed a complex web. These are the other safe points, explained Claire, noticing his interest. People and places that were part of the protection network. Some are still active today. A noise from the communication system caught everyone's attention. A green light blinked on one of the more modern panels. It's the signal we've been waiting for, said Claire, a smile of relief on her face. International contacts have recognized the system activation pattern. The protection protocol is being initiated. Helen, who was monitoring the security cameras through a tablet, noticed movement at the ranch. Michael and Nathan managed to shake off the pursuers. They're heading to the alternate meeting point. Sentinel suddenly raised his head, his ears twitching toward a sound only he could hear. Claire immediately understood the signal. Helicopter approaching, she announced, moving to another set of equipment. But don't worry, that one's ours. What do you mean ours? Asked Emily, confused. Your grandmother, replied Claire, looking at Richard. Beatrice wasn't just a socialite, as everyone thought. She coordinated an international network for the protection of historical documents. The helicopter is from the foundation she helped create. The sound of the rotor blades became more distinct, even through the storm. Sentinel remained calm, confirming there was no threat. That's why she traveled so much, murmured Richard, memories of his childhood taking on new meaning. It wasn't just social events. Your family built something extraordinary, said Helen, admiration in her voice. An international network dedicated to preserving historical truth. Claire activated a series of commands on one of the computers. Data screens began flashing rapidly, information being transmitted to secure servers in different parts of the world. The Phoenix Protocol, she explained. When activated, it sends copies of the documents to multiple international historical archives. Once initiated, it cannot be stopped. Emily, who was still organizing the physical documents they had brought, found something interesting. There are names here, people who are still in positions of power. That's why they tried so hard to keep this from coming to light, confirmed Claire. It's not just about the past. It's about influences that continue to this day. The helicopter was very close now, its sound muffled by the storm but still clearly audible. Special signal lights shone through the windows of the outpost. It's time, announced Claire, flipping a switch that opened a section of the roof, revealing a camouflaged landing area. The most critical physical documents will go to a secure archive in Switzerland. The rest is already being distributed. Digitally, Sentinel moved to a position that allowed him to observe both the landing area and the tunnel entrance. The horse seemed to understand perfectly the importance of the moment. The truth, said Claire, watching the helicopter begin its descent, as your grandfather always said, is like water. It can be contained for a while, but it always finds a way. The storm continued outside, but now it felt more like a celebration than a threat. Every thunderclap, every lightning strike marked a historic moment, the moment when decades of secrets finally found their way into the light. Richard watched the helicopter land precisely in the designated space, his heart filled with pride for his family's legacy. What had begun as a desperate escape to Hope Ranch had transformed into something much greater. The completion of a mission started decades ago. Dawn found the group gathered in the main room of the watchtower. The storm had finally subsided, leaving behind a clear sky and fresh air. Michael and Nathan had joined them during the night, bringing news from the ranch. The invaders have withdrawn, Michael reported, accepting a cup of coffee offered by Helen. When they realized the helicopter's arrival and saw the international markings, they understood it was too late. Claire worked intensely at one of the communication terminals, coordinating with contacts around the world. Screens showed news beginning to emerge in different countries, all related to the revelations from the documents. "The first phase is complete," she announced, removing her reading glasses. "Historical archives on 3 continents have already confirmed receipt and authentication of the documents. The process is irreversible now." Emily, who had spent the last few hours organizing a timeline of events, looked up from her work. "It's amazing how everything connects. Every document, every record tells part of a larger story." Sentinel watched the sunrise through one of the outpost's windows, his posture relaxed for the first time in days. The horse seemed to sense that his mission of protection had been successful. "I just received a message from the Beatrice Thompson Foundation," said Helen, checking her tablet. "They've already started the process of contacting the families identified in the documents. The first meeting is scheduled for next week in Geneva." Richard sat in an old chair, which had likely been used by his grandfather countless times. "It's still hard to absorb all of this. The scale of what they built, the reach of this protection network. Your grandfather and grandmother were visionaries," Claire commented, a gentle smile on her face. They understood that historical truth needed to be preserved not only to correct past injustices, but to prevent them from repeating in the future. Nathan, who was monitoring the security cameras, noticed movement on the main road. "We have visitors arriving, but this time they're officials, federal police cars and what looks like a team of historians." "Ah, yes," Claire replied calmly. "Part of the Phoenix Protocol. Once the documents are released internationally, the relevant authorities are automatically notified." Emily approached one of the screens showing international news. Headlines began to appear in different languages, all related to the discoveries. "Historical documents reveal international protection network during periods of repression," she read aloud. "American family-led efforts to preserve heritage and documents of political persecutees." Helen, who had received more updates on her tablet, shared the latest news. "The academic community is in an uproar. Historians from around the world are requesting access to the archives. This is going to rewrite important chapters of our history." Sentinel moved closer to Richard, as if offering comfort to the visibly emotional man. The horse, which had been crucial throughout that journey, seemed to understand the weight of the moment. "You know," Claire began, approaching an old framed photograph of Anthony and Beatrice Thompson, "they always said that Hope Ranch was more than a name. It was a promise. The promise that one day the truth would find its way to the light." The sound of approaching vehicles became more distinct. Michael, after verifying the credentials through the security cameras, confirmed that they were indeed the expected authorities. "And now?" Nathan asked, watching the cars park in the station's courtyard. "Now," Claire replied, her voice steady and serene, "the real work begins. The preservation of memory, the reconnection of families with their history, the correction of ancient injustices." Emily, who had finished organizing the last documents, smiled as she saw a group of historians and archivists emerging from the vehicles. "It's as if a cycle is being completed. What began as a refuge from danger has turned into a beacon of truth." Sentinel whinnied softly, as if expressing his approval. The sun was now fully above the horizon, its rays illuminating the watchtower through the strategically positioned windows. "Hope Ranch," said Richard, standing up to greet the visitors, "will continue to be a refuge, no longer just for our family, but for the historical truth that my grandparents worked so hard to preserve." The group prepared to welcome the authorities and researchers who were arriving. The legacy of the Thompsons, built over decades with courage and determination, was finally fulfilling its greater purpose, shedding light on the past to build a more just and aware future. 3 days had passed since the activation of the Phoenix Protocol. Hope Ranch had transformed into an improvised historical research center, with experts from different countries working tirelessly to process and catalog the revealed information. At the surveillance post, now equipped with modern technology that complemented the old systems, Emily coordinated a video conference with representatives from various international historical archives. The documents reveal a far more extensive protection network than we initially imagined, she explained, presenting her findings. It wasn't just about preserving material goods, it was a complete system for safeguarding historical knowledge. Helen, who was working with a team of historians in an adjacent room, had mapped surprising connections between families and significant historical events. Each document leads us to new discoveries, she commented, adjusting a screen that displayed a complex web of relationships. It's like we're piecing together a giant puzzle of history. Sentinel, who maintained his routine patrol, even though the ranch was now protected by official security, grazed peacefully near the post. The horse occasionally lifted his head to observe the constant movement of people and vehicles. Claire, who had become a central figure in coordinating the investigations, met with Richard in the restored library of the main house, now repaired, after the events of the stormy night. "We've found something special," she said, presenting a PT set of carefully preserved letters. "Correspondence between your grandmother Beatrice and important figures of the resistance in different countries." She wasn't just coordinating the protection of assets, but also facilitating communication between resistance groups. Michael, who had decided to stay at the ranch as a security consultant, entered the library with interesting news. Robert and his accomplices have been located trying to leave the country. The authorities have already detained them for questioning. Nathan, who was overseeing the installation of new security equipment, joined the group with his tablet. "You need to see this. Social media is buzzing with the revelations. Families from all over the world are speaking up, recognizing names and documents." "This is exactly what Grandpa and Grandma wanted," reflected Richard, examining an old photograph of his grandparents, "for the truth to find its way to the right people." In the improvised research center set up in the old barn, now fully renovated and equipped, an international team of archivists worked on digitizing and preserving the physical documents that would remain at the ranch. "Every paper tells a story of courage," observed Helen, showing Emily a particular set of documents. "Ordinary people who risked everything to protect not just material goods, but the memory of an era." Sentinel, who had approached the barn windows, watched the activity with interest. The horse seemed especially attentive when new documents were brought in for analysis, as if he understood the importance of each discovery. "You know what's most impressive?" commented Claire, rejoining the group in the barn. "The way Anthony and Beatrice thought about the future. They didn't just preserve the documents, they created a system that would ensure these stories survived and found their way to future generations." Emily, who had taken a break from her cataloging work, walked over to one of the windows. The afternoon sun illuminated Hope Ranch, highlighting the recent modifications that had transformed the property into a historical research center. "It's strange to think it all started with an escape," she reflected. "We came here seeking protection and ended up discovering that true protection lay in revealing the truth." A group of authorized journalists was carefully documenting the preservation work. Their cameras captured not only the technical procedures, but also the human stories that emerged with each new discovery. "The Beatrice Thompson Foundation has already begun locating the first heirs," Helen informed, consulting her tablet. "Some families who lost contact decades ago are reuniting thanks to the records preserved here." Sentinel whinnied softly as another convoy of vehicles entered the property. It was another team of international researchers, bringing specialized equipment for document analysis. "It's as if the ranch is fulfilling its true purpose," observed Nathan, who had become an essential part of the operation's logistics. "Not just as a physical refuge, but as a beacon of truth and reconciliation." Claire, who watched everything, with the satisfaction of seeing a decades-long plan finally come to fruition, smiled as a group of university students arrived for a special research program. "Anthony always said that knowledge is like a seed," she remarked. "It needs to be planted at the right time, nurtured carefully, and protected until it's ready to bloom." Hope Ranch, which had long kept its secrets in the shadows, now opened itself to the world as a center of light and discovery. Every document revealed, every story recovered, was a step toward the historical justice that Anthony and Beatrice Thompson had dreamed of. A week had passed since the official investigations began at Hope Ranch. The comings and goings of researchers and authorities had established a new routine on the property, turning the old refuge into a hub of historical research. Emily, who was coordinating the legal documentation process, met with an international team of lawyers in the makeshift conference room set up in the old barn. "The first restitution cases are already underway," she announced, presenting a series of digitized documents. "We've identified over 50 families with the right to reclaim assets held by my grandfather." Helen, who had become the academic coordinator of the project, complimented the presentation with her latest findings. "The connections go far beyond American borders. We've found links to resistance movements in at least 12 different countries." Sentinel, who maintained his patrol routine despite all the activity, had become something of a mascot for the researchers. The horse showed a particular curiosity for the document restoration procedures, often watching the work through the laboratory windows. "It's fascinating how he seems to understand the importance of what's happening," Claire commented, observing the animal attentively following the transport of a box of particularly delicate documents. Richard, who had returned from a series of meetings in Denver, brought important news. "The Federal University has approved the creation of a permanent center for historical studies here at the ranch. They will build proper facilities for research and preservation." Michael, who oversaw the security of the complex, approached with his tablet. "I just received confirmation. Robert has started collaborating with the investigations." He revealed the entire network of people interested in preventing these documents from coming to light. "Some of these people still hold important positions today," added Nathan, who had specialized in the technological aspect of the operation. "The revelations are causing a real political earthquake at various levels." At the Restoration Center, a specialized team worked carefully on preserving a particular set of photographs. The images revealed crucial moments in history, captured and safeguarded by Anthony and Beatrice Thompson. "Each photograph is a fragment of memory," observed Helen, examining an especially poignant image, "and together they tell a story of resistance and hope that transcends generations." Sentinel neighed softly as a group of special visitors arrived at the ranch. They were representatives of families who had been helped by Anthony Thompson decades ago, coming from different parts of the world to see the place that had protected their history. "It's moving to see the circle come full," commented Claire, watching the emotional reunions between family members reconnecting thanks to the preserved records. Anthony and Beatrice always knew this day would come. Emily, who had inherited her grandparents' determination and sense of justice, coordinated a parallel oral history project, recording the testimonies of people who arrived at the ranch with their own stories to tell. "Each testimony adds a new layer of understanding," she explained during a break in the recordings. "We're not just recovering documents, we're rebuilding the collective memory of an era." In the late afternoon, as the sun painted the sky of Appalachia with golden hues, the group gathered on the porch of the main house. The view of the ranch, now a vibrant center of research and discovery, was very different from the one they had found when they arrived seeking refuge. "Who would have thought," reflected Richard, watching the constant movement of people and vehicles, "that our escape would bring us here?" "It wasn't just an escape," Claire gently corrected. "It was a return to the original purpose of this ranch, to be a beacon of hope and truth." Sentinel grazed peacefully near the porch, his presence a constant reminder of how it all began. The horse, who had been instrumental in uncovering the ranch's secrets, now seemed content in his role as the guardian of historical truth. "You know what amazes me the most?" commented Helen, who had joined the group on the porch. "How meticulously all of this was planned. Your grandparents weren't just protecting documents, they were building a bridge to the future." Hope Ranch, which had started as a refuge from danger, had transformed into something much greater. It was now a living symbol of how truth, when protected and nurtured with care, always finds its way to the light. "And this is just the beginning," concluded Emily, looking toward the horizon where the sun was setting. "Every document revealed, every story recovered, paves the way for new discoveries. The truth, as Grandpa always said, is a river that cannot be contained. It always finds its way." A month had passed since the first revelations from the documents of Hope Ranch. The property, now officially transformed into the Antonio and Beatrice Thompson International Center for Memory and Historical Documentation, was preparing for its formal inauguration. The old barn, completely restored and modernized, now housed an impressive research complex. In the center of the main hall, a photographic exhibition told the story of the ranch and its sentinels through the decades. Emily, elegantly dressed for the inauguration ceremony, observed the final preparations alongside Sentinel. The horse, which had become a living symbol of the place's history, maintained its proud posture, as if understanding the importance of the moment. "It's incredible how everything has changed," she remarked, stroking the animal's neck. "And yet the essence of the place remains the same, a refuge for truth." Richard, who was overseeing the arrival of the first guests, smiled as he saw a particular group approaching. They were representatives of the first families who had reclaimed their history thanks to the documents preserved by their grandparents. "Mr. Thompson," called an elderly woman approaching with tears in her eyes, "I am Mary Ellen from the Rivers family. Your grandfather safeguarded my mother's jewels and documents. Thanks to him, I was able to recover not just material possessions, but my entire family history." Claire, who had become the official director of the documentation center, coordinated the reception team with the same efficiency she had shown alongside Anthony Thompson decades ago. "Every person who arrives brings a piece of the puzzle," she explained to a group of journalists. "The history we preserve here isn't just about the past, it's about how that past continues to shape our present." Helen, now the coordinator of the Historical Research Department, guided visitors through a special exhibition detailing the workings of the International Protection Network created by the Thompsons. "The most fascinating part," she explained, "is how each revealed document leads us to new discoveries. It's work that will continue for generations." Sentinel, who followed the activity with interest, showed a particular affection for the younger visitors, history students and early career researchers who came to learn about the center. "He seems to know that they are the ones who will carry on this work," observed Michael, who had decided to remain as a permanent security consultant for the center. Nathan, now in charge of the complex's technological infrastructure, proudly showcased the new digital cataloging system, which allowed secure access to the documents from anywhere in the world. "It's a bridge between the past and the future," he explained. "Technology allows us to preserve and share these stories in ways that Anthony and Beatrice could never have imagined." In the early afternoon, everyone gathered in the main auditorium for the official inauguration ceremony. Richard, in his opening speech, moved the audience as he recounted the journey that had brought them there. "We began seeking refuge from danger," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "But we discovered that the true refuge lies in truth, in the preservation of memory and the connection between past and present." Emily, who had taken on the legal direction of the center, presented the first results of the restitution work. "We have already reconnected over 100 families with their history, and this is just the beginning." The most touching moment of the ceremony was when a group of children, descendants of the families helped by the Thompsons, released dozens of white balloons into the sky of Appalachia. Each balloon carried a message of hope and gratitude. Sentinel, observing the scene from his usual post near the main entrance, whinnied softly, as if approving the celebration. The horse, who had been crucial in uncovering the secrets of the ranch, was now an integral part of its history. "You know," commented Claire, joining the group after the ceremony, "Anthony always said that the truth is like a seed. It needs time, care, and the right conditions to flourish. Today, I see he was right." The sun began to set over Hope Ranch, now transformed into a beacon of knowledge and memory. The last visitors departed, taking with them not just information, but a new understanding of the importance of historical preservation. "And to think it all started with a desperate escape," reflected Emily, gazing at the horizon beside Sentinel. "Now I understand why Grandpa chose that name, Hope Ranch. It wasn't just a name, it was a promise for the future." Richard, contemplating the property that had changed so much in such a short time, smiled as he saw a new group of researchers, arriving for the evening study program. "History never ends," he said. "Every discovery leads us to new paths, new stories to tell, new truths to preserve." The legacy of the Thompsons, built with courage and determination over decades, had finally found its true expression. Hope Ranch was no longer just a refuge. It was a beacon of truth and reconciliation, a place where the past and present came together to build a more just and aware future. Sentinel, as always, maintained his silent vigil, protecting not just a place but an ideal. The ideal that truth, when preserved with love and courage, has the power to transform lives and reconnect hearts across generations. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know which city you're watching from and we'll continue.